Hello, welcome to today's workshop. In this workshop, we're going to be talking about how to render CAD. We'll first start off with Onshape, which is what we've been using for the other previous two workshops, and then we'll go on to talk about Fusion. So as a quick self-introduction, my name is Isha. I am one of the CAD leads in FTC 18225 High Definition. I am going to be starting off this workshop, and then later Lucas, which is the person which does lots of the more main rendering in our team, will take over from there. If you've stuck with us for a while, we've already hosted two other CAD workshops. Those recordings will be available on YouTube in a playlist, and we will send out the recordings for that shortly. Yesterday was our event kickoff where we talked about the CADTable prompts, which I will discuss in just a minute. And if you're still interested in this competition, you're more than welcome to sign up and participate. So just a little bit about CADTable before we begin. CADTable is a CADathon, which is basically a hackathon, but for CAD, where you're given one of three prompts. So the beginning prompt is designing a trophy, the middle prompt is designing an improved Pringles box, and the advanced division is designing an apartment complex. You pick one of the three, and then you submit it in a week, which is April 3rd, and then our judges will judge it, and you can get cash prizes if you win. So if you're not already, make sure to sign up for those or learn more about the event on our website. Also, if you're just interested in being connected with me and some of the other CADers on our team, being involved in the CADTable Discord or more, you can go ahead and click the link on the screen in order to join that. So with that, I want to talk about a little bit about what we're going over today. So today we're going to first start out with talking about Onshape. There is some basic rendering colors that you can do there. And our team, what we did is that inside Onshape, we changed all the colors for all the items. Because it's easier to show animations using Onshape than with Fusion, but also it makes it easier to change those colors in Onshape originally, because in Fusion, you can just take everything that has a specific appearance and change it to something else. So if you change all those appearances in Onshape, it just makes it a lot more easier in Fusion. And then in order to get those really nice, amazing renderings that you probably see our team has started to be use, that's where Fusion really comes in. You don't have to rebuild your robot, definitely not. We're going to be exporting our Onshape files into a step file and then uploading that onto Fusion and then doing rendering that way. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So first, I'm just going to go ahead and quickly create a sketch. This should be familiar with you if you attended our first workshop. Go ahead and extrude it. And you notice that you get like this weird, ugly blue color. And we're going to go ahead and try to change this. So in order to do that, you need to right click on the part and you need to click Appearance. When you click Edit Appearance, you can customize the different colors. So you can make it purple, green, pink, blue. That was not pink, but whatever. Gray, red. So you can really pick whatever color you want. You can also change the transparency by using this transparency tool. You can save your customized colors if you want to use it somewhere else. You can change the quality of how it renders, but this doesn't really impact what you do when you're editing. So I would typically not edit this because it might make your Onshape slower. Typically, this rendering is pretty good already. You can go ahead and go over to the mixer if it's easier, if you want to pick something that's not just a specific color. So if you do actually want to make it pink, then you can go ahead and do that. So it's really, really straightforward to change your appearances in Onshape. But right now, it kind of seems like bland. It's not really popping out as much as it should. So what you can do is you can also edit, oh, whoops, not that. You can also assign a material. And by doing this, it kind of changes how it appears slightly. But also, if you decide to use this in order to make a part, then you can have this as reference to know what is metal, what's plastic, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to go ahead and, for example, pick steel. And you can see it doesn't really do much, but you can kind of see, I guess, that it's a tiny bit shinier. Okay, so those, like I said, are the main aspects of changing your appearance in Onshape. If you want to temporarily change the appearance of just a specific, I guess, part, what you can, I'm just going to create another part in order to show you what I'm trying to do. Okay, I'll just go ahead and extrude that. So let's say I have these two parts and I went ahead and imported it into this assembly and fastened this side with this side like so. Let's say I kind of wanted to, in this perspective, you can't really see this block. And even if I rotate it, now you can't see this circle perfectly. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to change the appearance so that you can see both of them at once. This is going to be more apparent if I look at it in this perspective. In order to do that, you can change temporary rendering, which means how it appears, by clicking on this little cube and changing it to without edges. Curvature, this is one of my favorites. You can change it to hidden edges removed. You can change it to translucent. This is really where you're going to see where those parts overlap. And this may make it easier for you to see where your parts overlap, whether it's in the right spot and other stuff like that. So you can see right now that I did made it to the center. And maybe if that wasn't apparent before, it is quite apparent now that the circle is not in the middle of the rectangle. Sorry, I just kind of messed up with what I was saying there. So that's if you change your rendering to something like this, you can be like, oh, my fasten is not right. And then you can go ahead and fix that up. And now it looks a lot better. In order to take a really nice picture of this, all you need to do is click on this drop down and click print. And then you can go ahead and move your part around using your mouse pad in order to get a proper picture of it. This is going to improve the rendering appearance better than if you, for example, took a snip of it. All right. So do you have any questions related to everything that I covered so far? All right. So if there's no questions related to that, I'm just going to go ahead and open up Fusion. I'm going to go ahead and start with like those basic appearances, and then we're going to have our professional render, so to say, come in a bit later to talk about how you can really perfect those renderings. And what you can do is that you can import your step file from Onshape onto Fusion. So, but for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and just create a new sketch. I'm just going to create a part. And then extrude that part a bit. Okay, so That is, I just quickly created a part inside Fusion, and then we can go ahead and talk about how you can download your step files from Onshape in just a little bit. What you can first do is you can go ahead and click on this modify panel and click on appearance. This is kind of like the first stage of changing your appearances by using it in Fusion. And if you go into the library, you notice that for different items, you have different appearances, but also different colors. Yeah, there you go. You can see that gold is a different color. So if I just click on this and drag it over to that specific part, you'll notice that it changes into that appearance. I can just override an appearance that I've created by dragging it over and just replacing it like so. And you'll notice that at the top, it includes which colors are inside the design already. You can also search up specific parts. So for example, if I wanted plastic, you can, for example, I can use this red color, and you notice that there is a bit of transparency to it. There is lots of options when it comes to Fusion, which is why Fusion is a better software when it comes to rendering than using Onshape. So that's really the main part of it. You can also kind of change the physical material by clicking on that physical material panel, but it really does the same thing because all you would do is select more specifically what type of material it is, but you can still change the color and stuff with this panel. So they both do pretty much the same thing. So it's whichever one works for you. Now that we have a basic introduction to how to do appearances in Fusion, I'm going to go ahead and teach you how to download your step file from Onshape onto Fusion so that we can get ready for when our, I guess, professional renderer comes in. So in order to do that, instead of clicking on print, when we did it up here inside this hamburger menu, just go ahead and right click on the file you want to export. Just click export. You're going to go ahead and want to do it in a step file because that is what Fusion accepts. And yes, you do want to download it. So just click OK. And you can go ahead and see that it downloaded onto my Edge tab. And sorry if I'm going a bit too fast. Do let me know if I am going a bit too fast for you if you have questions. What you can do next is that you can go over to, not that panel, I don't know where that popped up, into File. And now you can upload that file that we just exported from Onshape. So I'm just going to go ahead and select File, go into my downloads, click on that assembly, and you can go ahead and see that in Fusion, it is uploading right now. Go ahead and click on the upload button. And since mine was just like a 2-part assembly, it's going to upload pretty quickly. But if you have something like a robot, it will take a long time to do so. So that's why if you are uploading something like a robot, you want more time. But you can see for me, it was pretty quick. And now I want to go ahead and open what I just uploaded. So I'm going to go to File and this time Open. Open up that assembly. And if you give Fusion a minute, you can, don't save. You can see that we have our 2 parts in here. You notice that this looks quite different than what we have here. The reason is because we did change the appearance inside this cube from shaded, which is what it's supposed to look like, to translucent. This is temporary rendering changes. If you wanted to actually look like this, then you would want to go into each individual part, click on that edit appearance, and make it transparent. And then now you can see that it is actually transparent. But back onto Fusion, you can see that that was actually extremely simple. You just upload it, and then you can do the exact same thing that we just talked about with going into the appearance panel. And you can change the items. The thing that is useful with this is that it takes the colors that exist and converts it into familiar colors that it knows. So what you can do is that you can right click it and you can select all the objects with that singular appearance. You can unassign it and delete it. Oh, whoops, let me just undo that. And then sometimes you can just go ahead and outright just edit the appearance and override it directly. You can go into a color library, and let's say, I'm not sure how that's going to look like, but I guess that was the result. And you can just change everything with this specific appearance. So you can see that there's lots of options here. Fusion is like that. It has lots of customization. So if you become familiar with this over time, you can really customize it to be exactly how you want it to be rendered. So I'm just going to go ahead, and you can also override it. You can delete appearances from the panel so that you don't get confused. And that is really the main aspect to rendering inside Fusion. Just drag it over and change how it looks. So I'm just going to give you some time in order to kind of test it out, because that was a bit of a lecture. I'll give you around 5 minutes. You can quickly make a part in Onshape, or you can create it in Fusion if you know how to use Fusion already. But if you don't, that's all right, because we haven't taught you. So you can just create it in Onshape and upload it onto Fusion and play around with the appearances. And then if you have any questions along the way in the next 5 minutes, you can let me know. I go ahead and share my screen as I'm playing around with some of the appearances myself. So that's not completely just a dark Zoom room. Something cool I just realized is that you can go ahead and go into this faces drop down, and then you can just customize a specific surface. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Lucas to take over from here.
All right, thanks Isha for covering for me. I'll go ahead and talk about some more of the advanced stuff in Fusion itself. Alma, do you know if you would be able to give me screen sharing permissions?
Yeah, Isha can pass over the host permissions.
Perfect, thank you.
You should have them now.
All right. So I will be sharing my my Autodesk screen right now. So as you can see, this is a Fusion application. Currently, what's in here is just one of the tables that one of my friends made for another class. So as you can see, there's a wood texture going on right here. And we can go ahead and try and make some modifications. So Isha probably showed you already how to go into the render tab. So we're going to switch over to the render tab, because ideally you have everything already designed out in Onshape beforehand, because that's what we're working with. Looks like we'll have to wait a little bit, just a little bit, as it loads. Let's see. Here's being just a bit slow. So sometimes, from my experience with Fusion, if you have a lot of different things in the background, for example, here, as you can see, I've added a floor, a background of an actual location. it'll take a little bit of time to load into render mode. And you can always choose to not add this, or you can add it when you're about to do your final render. So don't be worried if you have some issues loading in. It might just take a while. So the first thing is, as Isha said, these appearances here, right? And as you can see, I've applied two main appearances. I think this is, I'm not sure what type of wood this is, but there's mahogany, walnut, and just normal mahogany. And I actually mentioned, in order to change them, you can look for wood here by searching and then dragging this onto one here, or you can choose to drag it directly onto a part. If you want to say you only want your top face to be a certain color, then you can of course use this drag and drag it onto the face with this face selected, and that will cause you to only cover that face. So let's talk about some more complicated things. In specific, with each of these designs, you can actually edit them directly. Here you can edit the scale. That changes the texture of, in this case, you can rotate it a little bit, or you can change the roughness, which I don't think you'll be able to see without zooming more in. Reflectance is one of the light properties as well. Let's say you use some sort of other metal, other sections. There's a lot available here. For example, let's use bead blasted aluminum just on the top layer, on the top surface. Here, I believe you'll be able to edit a bunch more of the things because it's not a direct texture here. You'll be able to edit the color of the bead blasted aluminum. You can always use your hex numbers here. The scale and rotation are still the same here. As you can see here, we have really big scale, which is high texture. And of course, if you have a decently powerful computer, usually you'll be able to get pretty good detail here. You'll also be able to access advanced material editor here. And this is one thing that you can use if you want to edit the pattern on the metal itself. In this case, let's choose a better example actually. Let's use anodized buff because you'll be able to, when you render it, you'll be able to see a better surface. Here you can see that in the advanced tab, you'll be able to do direct edits of like the relief pattern or the cutout, but in this case, this material does not have a cutout. These are all pretty advanced things. Usually you can just use the default materials and they cover a pretty wide range, especially if you're looking to some of the more common engineering topics like we were doing for the Pringles can, the trophy, or the apartment, or if you're doing something like robotics, which is something that I initially read this for. All right, so that's pretty much it for appearances, and I know Isha already talked a little bit about it. The next thing is the scene settings. So this is how we got this really nice background here and how we produce a lot of our images for our final render. So the first thing you can change here is the brightness. The brightness is pretty simple. You can adjust it yourself and try it out. It basically just lowers and increases the brightness of your surroundings. Usually I like to go for a brightness around 20,000. This is more of a sunset type, but if you want a brighter one, you can of course adjust it. Usually somewhere near the middle will work, and it's based on your own preference mostly. This position, you don't really need to change anything. I guess if you can just choose where the ground is. So if I wanted to, I could make this sit on this corner, but it doesn't matter as much, only if you have some sort of pre-produced image that you're using already. The next thing is the background here, and this is how we got the background here. Right now, I'm using the environment background, which means that I can go into the environment library and choose a background that I want to use. For example, I could switch this to the crossroads background, and it should, after a moment, just load the crossroads background. Yeah, it's loading right now. There we go. So here you can see now the table is in the middle of some unknown highway. So you change this by changing the environment library here. I believe you can attach a custom environment as well, but because most of my renders have been for the purpose of robotics, I've mostly used things like the cool light, which is just more direct lighting, looking for lighting. The second thing you can do, it says, is to choose solid color instead of environment. And this is one of the things I like the most because you'll be able to edit what color your background is just directly. And usually this makes for the simplest and cleanest renderings, especially if you want either a lighter background or a dark gray background or a black background. So this is what most of my renders are actually made. You edit the color by just clicking on this box here. Sometimes it'll take a little bit of time to load, so don't be worried if your Onshape doesn't respond for just a little bit. Checking or unchecking the ground plane basically allows you to toggle on the options for shadows and similar things. You can also add a reflection here, depending on what you want it to look like. Flat and ground doesn't really do much unless you have your environment library on here. If you have one of the, let's go back to the plaza because that one's pretty nice. We're going to let it load for a moment and then we're going to change this to environment. There we go. Now, if you see this, the flattened ground does make a difference. It helps with your perspective and also make sure that your position is standing on the right part, I think. Yeah, you look at this. Now, unless you go below the desired plane, your table is sitting on the right level height-wise. So if you look at here, that's what the flattened ground thing does. Here, your table is not, the ground is not aligned with your environment. Please make sure to ask any questions if you do have them. I'm watching the chat and you may unmute as well. And of course, reflections does the same thing here, but you should make sure that you use the reflections only when it's appropriate. And for example, in this case, you wouldn't expect to have a realistic reflection going on. All right, the next thing that's really important is whether you want to use perspective or if you want to use orthographic. So my recommendation is to always use perspective. The main reason here is because it makes your renders look more realistic, and that's the end goal we're looking for. Orthographic is similar to something you would see in Onshape, right? Orthographic makes sure all the sides look the same. It makes sure this left leg is the same height as the middle leg is the same height as the right leg, which is something that's helpful when we're designing in a tool like Onshape, but not as much when we're trying to get a good picture. In this case, our person is standing pretty close. The camera view is standing pretty close to the table itself. And this perspective view allows it to curve in a little bit to show that. You can change how close you're standing to the camera by changing the focal length here. As you can see, as I move out, it looks like I'm moving farther and farther away. If you move it all the way out, you get an orthographic perspective. But this is something you would see if you're looking at a table from an extremely far distance. However, if you move closer and closer, it's almost like you're getting closer and closer to the table. And this is like a similar view you would see as if you're right up in front of the table and looking at it. I don't think, you can go a little bit farther. And this is if you had your nose like literally on the table itself. So the perspective lens helps you get a much cleaner and more realistic look. And you want to make sure that you use that unless you have certain cases where, for example, say you have a part of your trophy that extends out and that ends up right in front of your camera. You might want to adjust either your focal length or try it orthographic. But in this case, this is something that you typically want to try and play around with. This exposure is very similar to the brightness, but it has more to do with your actual photographic exposure. I don't know too much about the theory about this, but you can kind of adjust this or just leave it on default, depending on what you're trying to look for. So we can maybe go with 11. That's so pretty bright. Let's go with 14.1, 13.1. So this gives a pretty nice lighting. Depth of field, I actually haven't used before. I think this is mainly around how blurred the background is, but because we only have one object here, it's not as applicable. So we're going to uncheck that. The aspect ratio, I'm not sure exactly what this is for either, but I believe it is for your end render. So your end render and how it's produced. I normally just use viewport and make sure my window is centered around this before I render. Okay, so that's the environment. We want to make sure we have a couple final things that we do before we actually render the whole thing. So this decal. Decals are things that you can upload into here, into Onshape. into Fusion from your computer. With this, you'll be able to insert like logos, trademarks into your actual piece. And say, I don't have a good example here, but say you wanted to put your team logo on the top of this board, you can do that through the decal menu here. I haven't actually used the texture map controls, but it's something that is more advanced and typically unnecessary. So that's it for the setup. We want to take a look at how we render. So the first thing is there's this button here called the in-canvas render. And you want to be careful about using this button unless you have a pretty strong computer. I'll hit it and let's see what happens. So what we're seeing originally is more of a preview. When you hit in-canvas render, it starts to render like it would in a real engine, right? As you can see, when I first started it, wow, Zoom is telling me I have low resources. It's because having this CAD running takes up quite a bit of resources from the computer. So when you first run it, it starts out blurry and it gets more and more clear. As you can see in this bottom part, it tells you elapsed time and how many iterations it's been, how many calculations have taken place since it started rendering. And it gives you about bars of excellent, final, and tells you about when you can maybe take pictures, right? So if you want just a quick picture, you can actually go ahead and just take a screenshot of this. But like Isha mentioned earlier with Onshape, you can produce better pictures with more than just a screenshot function, because a screenshot is limited to only the pixels on your screen. Notice here, you can't move it around, otherwise it will have to restart rendering all over again. Here, I'll zoom into the top, and then it'll have to start rendering itself all over again. This is normal and is indicative that you moved it and it needs to recalculate. All right, so this is something you can do to get an approximate idea of what your table or your design will look like in your actual render. Because in this render, you can see the top looks actually pretty bright, but when you render it, parts of it might end up darker than you expect. So if you take a look here, we can actually head back into scene settings and try and change the brightness a little bit higher. So maybe the top will be easier to see. So here we've made the entire scene a little bit brighter. The table top might still be a little bit dark because of the angles of the lighting, but we can either choose to change that in the environment lighting library, or we can choose to change the background. Okay, so here's the final steps. You've gotten your table or your whatever design it is. You've applied appearances. You've set up the scenes. So your last thing to do. Oh, by the way, you can use this capture image option as well, just to capture whatever's on the screen. It's kind of the Onshape equivalent, the Fusion equivalent of Onshape's print. Here are some settings for in-canvas render, but you don't need any changes. You probably just want to use your in-canvas render just for previews. Okay, this render button is the one that's the most important. Just hit this little keypad thing and this will pop up. You always want to choose final. Standard will not give you as good of a render, and final is always the better one. Make sure you choose cloud render. Choosing cloud render allows you to render it not on your own computer and use your resources, but it will send the resources to Autodesk's online cloud computers, and they will render it and then send you the image back. This allows you to get a much clearer picture much faster than your local render will be able to give. So render with cloud, render quality final. Image size. Usually I just do custom aspect ratio and native exposure. These first two and the height and width is just corresponding to your field of vision here. If you want to make sure you size correctly, that you leave a little bit of a margin between the top of your object and the top of your screen and the bottom of your object and the bottom of the screen, but not too much. So you get a good picture of it. Of course, you can also resize your screen to whatever aspects you want, or crop the picture after. So notice here that it says credits required 1. The good thing about having an Onshape, a Fusion education account, which you guys hopefully all have, is that you have free credits unlimited free credits, basically. If you see here, it says unlimited available credits. If you had a professional or a personal account, you would likely have a limited number of credits that you would not be able to use, that you would be limited. But in this case, because we have an education account, you have an unlimited number. So when we're here, we can just go ahead and hit render. It's first going to save, and then you're going to see it's going to say submitting, and you'll see a pop-up here at the very bottom. You can, at this time, you can close this window. It's already submitted, and it's already in the queue here. And depending on what you're rendering, in this case, it's a pretty small object, the table, and it's not as complicated as other things like a robot or an apartment building might be. And this will usually take maybe 5 to 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more, depending on your Wi-Fi connection, I believe, to render. This is comparable to things like the Pringles can, that is our our intermediate challenge, as well as the trophy, that is our novice challenge. Here you can take a look at V2, which is one of the other renders I made previously with this table. We can make it a little bit larger, I think. Here you can see that this quality is pretty high. It looks almost like it's a real wood table sitting on a plaza with actual shadows. Fusion is able to use ray tracing software and other advanced rendering tools to allow it to look very realistic, honestly. And this is a very helpful skill that can be used for marketing or other different All right, so if you look at this, hopefully you guys have been following along so far. You hopefully have a rendering at the moment, and will be able to see a picture of your object very shortly. All right, does anybody have any questions? Please do let me know. We have around 10 more minutes left, and I can help with anything that you guys might have trouble with. How are you guys doing? Are you guys following along?
Haven't been following along because I've never rendered anything yet before, so just paying attention, but it's been super helpful.
Yep. Is there anything do you have Fusion right now, and are you trying to render something?
Yeah, I'll probably try to render something in this bit here.
Yeah. All right. And do let us know if you have any questions, of course. I'll be happy to help. Oh, that's cool, Drishti. Yeah, I know. I know different. Sometimes classes will use Fusion for 3D printing, and mostly use the design aspect of it rather than, the design aspect of it more than the render aspect. Let me try and find the right design. Here, there's a couple more interesting things that you can try out. If I can find the right CAD file for it. There's been quite a few. If you guys have ever seen robotics renders or other renders, in Onshape, there's appearance which will let you emit light, and sometimes when you use a dark background and add a white sheet under that will emit light, you can create a pretty neat effect. So I'm going to go ahead and try and open it. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have it open actually. Okay, so I'll go ahead and show our robot from earlier this year, rendered in the design tab. And this might take a little bit to load because it's pretty heavy. All right, let's see if we can pull up on the render tab. All right, so here you can see an example of our earlier iteration robot rendered in with a grayscale background. So if you go back, this is something that we edited by going to the scene settings and then changing the solid color here. One tip that I have in case that you find that rendering this crashes your Fusion or something like that, a couple of my friends and I have experienced that, is that you can go ahead and clear out all of your parts just by pressing the eyes, and that makes everything disappear and not have to render in your thing. Then you can change the color and then bring them back, and usually this will help you. It will help you avoid crashing Fusion if you face those issues. You don't have to do that every time unless you have to. As you can see here, I've added different materials. Here is on all the servers here, I've added a pink coat by using the add appearance to face here, and I've added a steel satin appearance to each of these. If you with each of these bars here, I've also added I think it's powder coat rough gray, and here we can go ahead and try an in-canvas render to take a look at exactly how that would look. So it will render in a moment. There's a lot here. And as you can see, it's starting to get clear and clear. Main things to look for are the nice reflection that the steel satin appearance gives here, as well as the rough surface on the metal itself. It's a little bit difficult to see at the moment because of low lighting, but in several renders you can see the how valuable this photorealistic appearance is here. If you take a look at this one, the material selected for this one is ABS plastic because we opted to use 3D printed parts here. You can notice the sort of translucent glow that appears on these materials, giving it a much more photorealistic look than if you just had the standard arm that was a solid color in Onshape or others. Here's another good example here. You take a look. I applied a polycarbonate with a shade onto this part of the arm, and this allows the light to pass through and allows for a much more realistic look as well. And finally, you can take a look at this one. You can see the nuts and the screws, as well as the various bearings. And gears have a shiny look due to the steel satin appearance. So having this skill of rendering, whether you choose to use Onshape or if you choose to use Fusion or other softwares, there are definitely other softwares that can render as well. I believe Onshape, in fact, is developing a plugin that allows you to render. It doesn't seem to be fully functional at the moment, but they're working towards it. it really helps you to produce images that are very clean and appealing to others who could be providing you with important funding, judging, or other awards. So I encourage you guys to, because of the photo added on photo submission, to go ahead and try and render whatever you're making in Fusion and submit that, because it will be much more appealing to whoever is viewing it. Do you have any final questions before we call it a day? All right, sounds good. Thank you all for joining us for today's rendering CAD workshop. Thanks for Isha for covering the beginning part with Onshape and porting over to Fusion. And I hope you guys have if you are just end up competing in CADTable, you guys have a successful time. And I hope to see your submission in the near future. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.